Ekabo, everyone. Aboro, Aboye, Aboshishe. Today's live is going to be around the subject of ancestors. All right, it's going to be a light discussion today. We're not going to go into no great details. We're not going to deal with veneration, but we're going to talk a little bit about what are ancestors. And as usual, before I begin the lesson for today, I'm going to offer an oriki to start. This oriki is from Eji Ogbe, and it reads, Bi Aba Bo Oju, Bi Aba Bo Imu, Isale Agbon Eni a Parire Adafun Ormila Eni Bati O en Lo Ba Ashelowo Oludumare Orubo Oludumare Siwafi Ashe Fun Enigbati Bogbo Aye Bo Pioti Bo Ashe Lowo Oludumare and one si and one two or Bogbo Iyati Owi si and she Lati Igba Wa Eni Enwipe Ashe Ashe Ashe. Alright, so today's discussion is going to be about ancestors. Alright, we would hear, it's a very commonly used term these days. It's a very trendy term. Right? And the question is, what is this about? Right? Normally when you hear the term ancestors, it speaks about all of our blood relatives who have lived before us. All right? The ANT part of the word speaks about those in front, right? The anterior in Latin means front. So when we speak of ancestors, we speak of those of our bloodline who have lived before us. So as long as you are alive, you have ancestors. All right? In our tradition, when we talk about ancestors, we are speaking primarily about those who are in our family. We are talking about those who are of our bloodline. All right? If we want to talk about those who lived before us that may not have been in our bloodline, sometimes you would hear the term Orisha used. All right? Or elders that has already transitioned. Right? But they generally are not referred to as ancestors. All right? So let's talk a little bit about ancestrality and things like DNA. All right? Modern science has discovered that a lot of the characteristic traits, behaviors, attitude, and specific biological traits we inherit to a great extent from our parents. All right? And by the term parents, generally, it is in reference to your mother and your father. All right? But when we use the term ancestors, we are not only speaking specifically of your parents, but we are speaking of your grandparents, your great-grandparents, your great-great-grandparents, and all of those before you that are related to you, from whom you would have received your DNA, from whom you would have received to a great extent many of the patterns that shows up in your behavior. You would have inherited those things from those before you, socially, and as far as your behavior and your attitudes are concerned. All right? Yes, we are aware that we are social creatures. We live in a society. We live in a community. And there are other forces that would shape your attitude and the way you view life and the way you behave. But today, we are mainly concerned with the things that are related to ancestors, and in this case, your family. All right? In our tradition, knowing your lineage, knowing your family is very, very important. All right? In our tradition, what we do is we call to memory all of those who lived before us by name. This is the way that we are able to retain our family memory, collect our family's collective memory. Repeatedly, we say it on a regular basis. Our children would learn of those who lived before us. They would learn also of some of the characteristic traits of the persons once these are things that are discussed on a regular basis. All right? I'm going to do some reading today from a book that is called Practical Foundations of Ifa on the issue of ancestors. And when I'm finished reading, we would go further into some discussions. All right? The concept and practice of ancestral reverence exists across the globe and through a multitude of cultures and traditions. Even some practices of Christianity are a form of ancestral veneration, such as via the Eucharist. Each version is central to a cultural identity and not easily transferable. Therefore, in this section, we will not limit ourselves to following only a specific protocol to engaging in ancestral veneration, but instead, this section is written with the intention to support ongoing discussion on ancestor practice and how it shows up in your own personal inner work as a part of defining yourself and your personal practice. All right? From the perspective of the friends and family of the departed, they experience a great impact following the death of their loved ones. One's ancestors, having shared in the universal human experience, can be strong supporters for the destiny one has chosen. Many devotees of Ifa within the diaspora engage the dearly departed by erecting various types of shrines for ancestors made to reside within the homes. Additionally, families may make it a routine to visit relatives where their remains reside in a cemetery as part of a routine. All right? Which is part of their spiritual and religious practice. For many in the West, having a place of worship in our homes is a helpful practice. Death, indeed, is a universal experience. Rather than believing that death is an end to life, Ifa devotees in West Africa prefer to engage the concept that death is instead a passage into another form of life. Though this may be unseen by the naked eye of the living, one of the goals in life is to become an ancestor, which by definition in Ifa practice is a remembered person who lived out their life fully and meaningfully. The deceased family members in West Africa often have celebrations of their life for years following their death, and are even often buried within the family home. All right, at some time in the past we did that here also, for those who own their own property. This manner of interfacing the ancestors may not be common or sustainable in other parts of the world. As diverse as humanity is across the globe, we may instead reach a deeper understanding by answering these questions ourselves. What does ancestor veneration play in informing who you are and how you show up? All right, I'm going to stop here for now, and I'm going to try to discuss or elucidate on some of the things that I've just read. All right, the first thing is he mentioned it being a comparison to the Eucharist that is practiced by the Christian church. All right, now in one of my previous lessons, when I was teaching specific things about Christianity that our ancestors, when they first came to the Americas, were exposed to and were taught forcibly. And what I was doing is showing these teachings and showing what our ancestors would have known, that they would have been able to identify within the framework of the Christian teachings. All right. When I spoke of that, I did some reading from various scriptures. All right, including Matthew chapter 3 verses 4, Psalms 30:11, Luke 1:17, Luke 1:15, Numbers 6:3, Judges 13:4, etc., etc. All right, if you were to look at those scriptures, you would discover that a lot of the traditions does in fact share that common practice of recognizing and paying respects to their ancestors. All right. Now, there are specific religious commemorations. I want to use the word holy days or holidays, but I would say commemoration. For example, in Christianity, they have something called All Souls Day, and they have All Saints Day. Those basically are the days where they recognize or they venerate those who have transitioned. Throughout the Bible, many of the patriarchs that are mentioned, that are used a lot of times during Christian prayers, where they would mention persons such as Abraham and Moses and all these past individuals who would have made contributions towards that religious tradition, it is in fact a form of veneration. All right? So that is what in the early part this book was explaining. It is not a practice that belongs or that we alone practice. It is recognized in many other old traditions. All right? He mentioned the construction of altars, right? I do not wish to go too much into that subject, except to say that that is in fact an aspect of our tradition. All right, that is part of our practice. All right, now I want to talk about a little bit, I mentioned it already, right? And the last question he proposed here was concerning how this veneration informs who you are and how you show up. All right, we must consider this fact. The families that we are born into brings us into certain types of circumstances in life, or what some people may refer to as social status or status, some pronounce it. Meaning, when you are born into a family, your parents may or may not have wealth. They may be poor, they may be extremely wealthy, they might even be middle class. These things to a great extent would influence and affect your upbringing. It would determine the type of exposure you would have to many things, the level of education you may attain, your travels, whether you would be able to visit many countries during the vacation time, whether you would be involved in religion, whether, the types of social activities. All of these things are to a great extent influenced by your family situation. Your parents, their situation would have been affected by their parents, and their parents' situation would have been affected by their parents before them. Okay, so this ancestrality in concept is a very, very important and pivotal thing that determines how a person's life is going to be, quite possibly who they are going to be and how they are going to turn out in life. It does not mean, mind you, that there are not exceptions to this situation. All right, but you do not make the minority of occurrences the norm. What you do is you look at the majority of situations, and that is considered the norm. So we are saying that your social situation does in fact affect who you are and how you are going to be. All right? I want to just discuss one other important factor where DNA and thing is concerned. In the biological reproduction of a child, 70% of the material that forms the fetus comes from the woman. 30% of the material that forms the fetus comes from the man. All right, this is a biological fact. All right, so that would give you an idea of the level of influence biologically, right, and genetically that is donated or contributed by both your parents and by their parents also in turn. All right, now I'm going to talk a little bit about the socialization aspect. The role and the function of motherhood is very, very important. It's something that I think a lot of time in our modern times, we sort of take this for granted. But let's look at it and let's really give it some deep thought. Every child that is produced by a woman would spend the most important years of their lives, or what we call the formative years of their lives, very much attached to their mother. All right, the first 9 months they are physically attached. And then when they are born, they develop a symbiotic relationship with their mother, an attachment. This continues on in a lot of cases for the rest of your human life. Okay? But because of your development from stage to stage, the relationship would develop. But let's look at some of the benefits of these things. Beside the 70% genetic contribution to the embryo, when the baby is born, the mother nurses the child. So all of the child's nourishment is received from his mother. All right? The milk that is produced by the mother, the quality of that milk is determined by two factors. One, how the mother herself eats. The nutrition that she gets from the food she eats, she passes that on to the child. The second part is a biological fact. It has to do with biology. Is that when the child suckles his mother's breast, the areola on the breast has a pores, and the saliva from the baby's mouth is absorbed into the pores. And through the absorption of the child's saliva, the breast milk is altered to suit any deficiencies the baby may have. I hope we are understanding the seriousness of what a mother does for a baby. After the child is nourished and the child develops, the child then crawls or creeps, and then after a while the child is able to walk. All of this time, if the child is nursing, the child is receiving nourishment from the mother's body. When the baby is weaned off of its mother's milk, the person who puts the food into the mouth of the child is the same mother. So therefore, all human beings are taught how to love, how to eat, how to communicate, how to relate by their mother. So therefore, the true measure of any society, of any community, is determined by the woman in that community. In African tradition, or in our tradition, or in indigenous tradition, women are valued and they are considered to be very important. They are so important, I'm going to explain to you an important aspect of the structure of indigenous or traditional society, ours. Whenever any highly important official has to be elected and installed, that individual must meet a rigorous procedure and be approved by the woman of that society. So this tells a story in itself as to how important the role of women are in our society and always would. During colonization, a lot of these things were partially destroyed by the colonizers because they recognized if our leaders listened to the voice of the woman and always had a deep consideration in making decisions, the views and the opinion of the woman, then it means the influence of the powerful individuals in that society lay at the feet of women. And what they discovered, the colonizers, is that with that type of power, they would not have been able to sway, bribe, or manipulate the male leaders. So what they did, of course, is they broke these female societies in order to be able to have access to the persons who were in positions of power and authority, which in our tradition is mainly men. All right? So I'm going to move forward a little bit. I'm going to do a little more reading. And then I'm going to talk about, what I've read a little. And some more. It is noteworthy to understand that not all ancestors are worth venerating or qualifying for such remembrance and interaction. There are those ancestors who are considered venerable and others that are non-venerable. In order to be qualified as a venerable ancestor, one must have lived a life worth remembering and celebrating based upon a lifetime of good deeds acquiring merits. All right, now that is a very, very important aspect of ancestral veneration. What we do is we venerate the positive ancestors. Okay? And the reason for that is obvious. Because we want to look up to persons, just as it says, who had lived a good life that is meritorious of acknowledging and recognizing and calling to memory. All right? You would want, when you do a family tree, which is important for all of us to do, because when we do the veneration, we call all our ancestors that we know of by name, and even those sometimes that we do not know. But it is always important when we call on these good ancestors, the venerable ancestors, that we recall some of the good deeds that they would have performed. All right? So sometimes, even if you're doing a family tree, you would make notes next to the names of the ancestors and some of the characteristics they may have had. Well, as we know, in our tradition, a lot of times, beside the ancestors having a first, a last, and sometimes a middle name, sometimes they would have had aliases that would have been indicative of their good character. So what we do sometimes is when we recognize them, sometimes we include that part of their name that tells something about who they were and the type of characteristics, good characteristics, that they would have had. All right? So I'm going on to read a little bit more now. Many times, reverence of one's ancestor can help to address issues such as healing generational curses or blockages to progress that are locked within one's spiritual and physical DNA. All right. About 2 streams ago, I spoke about trauma, generational trauma. I spoke about slavery, and I also even mentioned the Willie Lynch syndrome that is associated to the trauma. All right, some of these things can be very much addressed during the period of veneration. All right, because during the prayers or meditation, or what we call Iwori, challenges that you may have as a person, your ancestors would have experienced similar things because of their natural propensity. Those propensities are built into your DNA also. So sometimes communicating with them on some of these challenges, you might be able to get comfort, you might be able to get guidance, you would be able to definitely get some sort of useful response and aid from those who have transitioned before you. All right? At times, we might be advised through divination to prepare meals for the ancestors and to invite family and friends to all partake together while we remember the dearly departed. This is referred to as Sara. All right? Ancestors and the family from which they ascend offer the opportunity for living to learn about acceptance or the unfortunate alternatives. Learning what is not acceptance, whether or not we have difficult relationships with our family, and potentially, by extension, some ancestors. We choose the family as much as we choose our own Ori. There is some fervorance to be made. All right, now, on the issue of Sara, I'm not going to say too much about that on this stream. We will discuss Sara, Saraka, Saraka. We're going to discuss all of that in a future stream. All right, but today they mentioned Sara as playing a role in ancestral veneration. All right. In Owori Ogunda, Ifa says, the way we propitiate Egungun is the same way Egungun supports one. The way we propitiate Osa is the way the Orisha accepts our propitiation. If we propitiate Ifa consistently, it will surely bless us with Ire. These were the Ifa messages to Orunmila when going to heaven to receive 400 crowns to the world. He was advised to offer Ebo, and he complied. All right? Now, there are many things used in the process of propitiation, which again we would get to in a future stream. But there are specific things that one needs to learn in order to be able to properly venerate our ancestors according to the way of our indigenous tradition. I just read something that spoke about Egungun in the Odu Owori Ogunda. The Egungun is a form of masquerade that is a symbolic representation of our ancestors. So, in recognizing and venerating the Egungun, it is a means by which we venerate our ancestors. Okay? Now, Egungun is ancestral and it is related to ancestrality, but it is something slightly, it requires slightly different, how should I put that? It is in reference, let me explain then. It is in reference to our primordial ancestors, which is a little different to those who were just born before us and who were responsible for our existence. The primordial ancestors would have been the first ones to exist and to come to IA. Alright? But again, the details of that, you would have to attend classes to receive detailed teachings on the details of Egungun and who were our primordial ancestors and the role that they played. But the original seed of man came from our primordial ancestors. That is as much as I can say on the subject on this show. Alright? I'm going to read now from some of my personal notes. Orisha, as stated, are elevated ancestors who are recognized for their notable contributions to our society. So this definition explains the difference between what we would call ancestors in the real sense, which is just our biological predecessors, versus the Orishas, which are also ancestors, but they may not directly be our ancestors, in the sense that they are not born in your particular lineage, all of the Orishas. Alright, there might be one particular Orisha that may belong to your lineage. Alright, and that is something to also that requires a lot of very deep explanation. Alright, these ancestors are venerated and recognized by name, and their virtues and characteristics emulated by their descendants, who have been identified as having a link, and in brackets I have DNA, in their characteristic makeup, which causes them to be inclined and imbued to specific characteristic traits, which I've mentioned a little earlier. The process of identification is complex, but includes many layers of observations, rituals, and finally, specific directive, which governs the person's role in society. All right? Foundation establishing. Rituals are done to determine individuals' roles based on their personal destiny. This places a person in a place where they can be thoroughly prepared for their role by others who are more experienced than them. Hence, culturally and traditionally, seniority is given a high priority in our community, right? Or in some organizations and houses, all right? As well as groups. Pair relations ensure the development of members of our community or society, which occurs with a great level of balance and social consideration as stages in the lives of individuals, all right, who must carry out or carry about themselves based on specific social expectations. All right. The natural evolutionary order teaches seniority, but also emphasizes the importance of individual development within a peer system. Collectively, a society needs strong individuals who have been properly trained and socialized to function within a community that is cohesive and orderly. All right, and with that, I would like to close off today's stream. All right, I would like to thank everyone who has been here for dropping in with us. And I would like to remind you all that you do good for yourself. You do bad for yourself. All right, and just another reminder before I close, for those individuals who have registered for the class begins on Thursday. It will run from 6 to 7 p.m. I have sent out notifications and links to the message boxes of persons who have indicated an interest. All right, one class could only take 30 persons. So for other persons who indicated an interest, I have already registered at least 15 persons for the other class, which will begin on December 12th. All right, so with that, I would like to say, may Oludumare bless you. May he bless your family, bless your community, and may he bless the nation by extension. Odabo, and see you next week.